Have you ever wondered what an action movie would look like if it was just one long fight scene? Like no breaks, no plot, just straight up non-stop action? May I introduce to you the Japanese film Crazy Samurai Musashi, also known as Crazy Samurai 400 vs. 1, where the entire movie is basically one continuous fight. No cuts, no camera tricks, just a 77-minute fight. That's a pretty insane concept, right? And trust me, out of all the movies I've seen in my life, this is definitely one of them. So to start off, who could in their right mind think of something this wacky, this zany? Well, that would be Sion Sono, the director of such interesting movies like Love Exposure and Why Don't You Play in Hell. This guy is known for pushing the boundaries of Japanese filmmaking. Sano had an idea for a samurai film called Kenkichi, and it was supposed to have a 10-minute uncut fight scene. Sounds like a solid concept, right? I guess Sano didn't think that, because he left the project for reasons nobody's really clear on. And that's when Tak Sakaguchi, the indie action star, took over. You might know Tak for films like Versus or Reborn. So what does he do with Sano's concept? He decides to take that 10-minute fight scene and turn it into the entire movie. A 77 no-cut, one-take fight scene. Yup, 77 minutes of continuous action. Just Tak and his sword going at it for over an hour. And the stunt team? They trained for months to pull this off, rehearsing over and over to make sure they could handle the sheer insanity of this shoot. Now, before we get into the good stuff, let me break down the story. The movie starts with a 10-minute setup. We're in the year 1604, and the Yoshioka family is getting ready to battle Miyamoto Musashi, played by Tak. Musashi is a legendary figure in Japanese history, a real-life swordsman with a body count that puts most action heroes to shame. He's been featured in tons of movies, most notably the Samurai trilogy from the 1950s. But Crazy Samurai Musashi takes a different approach, throws you right into the middle of his story. Here's the thing though, the movie doesn't really explain any of this. There's no backstory, no exposition, nothing. The film just assumes you already know that Musashi has defeated two Yushokia brothers in duels, and now the family wants revenge. They gather hundreds of fighters to take him down, and that's all the context you're getting. If you don't know the history of Musashi, well, you're kinda out of luck. I had to do a bit of research myself to figure out what was going on, because the film basically gives you nothing. But honestly, I guess that just kinda adds to the mystery, right? All you really need to know is that Musashi is about to face off against 400 dudes, and it's gonna get brutal. So after a brief intro, Tak makes his entrance as Musashi, and is probably one of the boldest character introductions I've ever seen. What does he do? Kills a kid. Okay, bold move, that's a first. With that, we get the title card, and it's game on. The 77-minute one-take fight begins. Now, I've got to give credit where credit is due. This is one of the most ambitious things I've ever seen in a movie. Maybe I can even call it experimental. One of the only instances of experimental action cinema I can think of. That doesn't really mean it's perfect. Let's talk about how it actually turned out. First off, the whole thing just kind of looks like it was filmed on a GoPro. It's shaky, blurry, and honestly, it's a pretty rough watch. When you're shooting a 77-minute fight with no cuts, you can't really have super intricate choreography. It's just not possible to memorize and perform something that complex for that long. So instead, we just get Tak just kind of hacking and slashing his way through enemies, and it gets really repetitive really quickly. Like super repetitive. You'll see him doing the exact same move over and over again, and after a while it starts to feel like you're stuck in a loop. Another thing that really stands out is the enemies. There are times when Musashi is surrounded by dozens, if not hundreds of guys at the same time. But instead of all rushing him at once, they sort of just stand there, waiting patiently for their turn to get cut down. It's almost respective how they each let the previous guy get killed first. Maybe every now and then 2 or 3 of them will attack at once, but for the most part, they're just hanging out in the background waiting for their moment. It's honestly pretty funny when you think about it. After about 20 minutes, you've basically seen everything the movie has to offer. The fight doesn't evolve, it just keeps going and going. Sure, there are some mini-bosses sprinkled in to shake things up, but they're over just as quickly as they start. You get these cool-looking characters with unique weapons and you think, alright, here we go. But nope, they get taken out in seconds. It's almost like playing a beat 'em up video game where you're just spamming the exact same move at endless waves of henchmen. You could watch this movie at 5 times speed and still have the exact same experience. Oh, and speaking of the action, let me just say this. Tak does the best he can. Truly shown the physicality it takes to film fight scenes, he actually takes water breaks during the fight. I'm not even kidding. You'll see him literally stop mid-battle to drink some water, which is both ridiculous and pretty impressive. I mean, this whole concept is nuts, and you've got to respect the effort that it went to pulling it off. The fight was shot in real time, in a real location, with real stunts. It's a crazy feat. Even if the execution isn't perfect, eventually we do get a final boss fight, but it's more of the same. The pacing is still slow, with lots of pauses in between each action beat, and by this point you're probably just waiting for the movie to end. The whole fight scene was actually shot in 2011, but the opening and ending scenes were shot 7 years later in 2018, so when you see the final fight that says 7 years later, you're actually watching a battle that was filmed almost a decade after the main event. And here is where things actually get interesting now. The final scene, it's actually really good. It's faster paced, the quality's higher, and Musashi finally takes out a bunch of enemies in quick succession, like we'd hoped for this entire movie. It's almost like a different film altogether. Musashi slices through about 30 guys in 2 minutes, and this is the kind of action I like. The difference between the final scene and the one-take fight is like night and day. It's actually kind of frustrating because it shows what the movie could have been if it had a little bit more polish. So, look, this movie isn't for everyone, maybe not even for me. You're probably not going to sit through all 77 minutes of this one-take fight without checking your phone or skipping ahead. But you've got to admire the ambition. This is one of the most daring action movies ever made, and even though it has its flaws, it's something you won't see anywhere else. Tak Sakaguchi and his team deserve a ton of credit for pulling off a feat like this, and who knows, maybe someday we'll see another filmmaker take on this concept and really nail it. Are you brave enough to take on crazy Samurai Musashi, or is this way too out there for you? Let me know in the comments below. I'll be making many videos on all type of action films, so if that's something you'll like, please subscribe.